Greetings, Pokey fans! Michael here, and welcome to the newest installment of my Pokemon Types Then vs. Now series, where I go over the history and all of the changes that a particular Pokemon type has gone through over the course of the main series Pokemon games. Today I'm going to be focusing on the Poison type, a type that has gone through a lot more changes than I think most people realize. And that covers all the intro stuff, so don't forget to subscribe to my channel, please. Let's start off this year good, please. And let's dive into, haha, it is I, Grunty Boy. Hello, Grunty Boy. What did you come here to steal today, but actually end up spectacularly failing to do so? Oh, I succeeded this time. I perfectly timed my heist to steal your Raycon earbuds right before they sponsored this video. So now you can't properly do your integration. Let me guess, you stole someone else's thinking they were mine. Look, I'll show you, I still have mine. I'm gonna reach into my pocket right now and pull out my Raycon. Grunty Boy, give them back. And why would I do that? With these Raycon earbuds, I get 6 hours of playtime, more bass, seamless Bluetooth pairing, and a nice compact design that gives me a comfortable, noise-isolating fit. I know, they're great, so give them... Complain all you want, I can't hear you. They come in a range of fun colors and patterns with a variety of ear fit options, and the lack of dangling wires or stems is phenomenal. As you can see, they stay in really well. And also, it's nice to not have any annoying dangling wires while I'm out and about. You know, committing larceny. Grunty Boy, I am obviously aware of how great Raycon earbuds are. I have been using mine regularly for the last year since I got them. I've been using them to work out, start some new hobbies, do some work around the house. They're awesome. Which is why I am very upset you stole them from me, and I want you to return them right now. Oh, you poor, ignorant, and ugly little boy. Ugly? We look the same. Look, man, I'm sorry, but I could never willingly give up these pristine pieces of technology that are half the price of premium audio brands, but don't sacrifice any of the quality. You know, it's no wonder celebrities like Snoop Dogg and, of course, myself, are obsessed with Raycons. I told you I already know all of this. I also know they have a 45-day free return policy because they are that committed to giving their customers a great experience start to finish. I mean, I certainly had a good customer experience. You didn't buy them! I can see that you're very upset, so would it make you feel any better if I told you that if you go to buyraycon.com/MandJTV, linked in the description below, that you can get 15% off your order? I would prefer you just gave mine back, but I cannot deny that I love them so much that I would buy them again. With a discount. Oh, shut up. Okay, bye-bye. Wait, no, come back and... Freaking... Thank you so much to Raycon for sponsoring. But now let's dive in to Poison-type Pokemon, then versus now. We'll start things off with Generation 1, which was the most poisonous generation. It introduced an astounding 33 different Poison-type Pokemon, which makes it not only the most abundant type in Gen 1, but it's also the most amount of Pokemon of a single type introduced in a single generation ever. Second place is 32 water types in Gen 1, third place is 29 water types in Gen 3, and then it drops down to 22 normal types in Gen 1. I think the main reason there was such an incredibly large amount of poison type Pokemon in Gen 1 is that almost half the bug types, more than half the grass types, and literally all of the ghost types were also poison type. And then there were lots of other poison-type Pokemon on top of all of those. Let's list all of the fully evolved poison-type Pokemon introduced in Gen 1, and there are a lot. Venusaur, Beedrill, Arbok, Nidoqueen, Nidoking, Golbat, Vileplume, Venomoth, Victreebel, Tentacruel, Muck, Gengar, and Weezing. Clearly there's no shortage of them, which makes me find it so strange that Koga, the poison type specialist, has teams that are just chock full of repeats. Like, what are you doing, man? You have so many options. Variety is the spice of life. So Gen 1 was unusual for the poison type because of just the sheer number of them, but it was also unusual because its type matchups were different. This was the type chart for the poison type in Gen 1. It was resisted by itself, ground, rock, and ghost, which is still the case today. And that is the only segment of this chart that is the same now as it was back then. Well, that and poison not being immune to any other types. The individual matchups that were the same are poison being strong against grass, being weak to ground and psychic, and then resisting itself, fighting, and grass. The biggest difference between then and now was the poison type's relationship with bug. Poison was both super effective against bug and weak to it. This is the only instance in all of main series Pokemon history of two different types being super effective against each other. Today, bug and fighting are two different types that resist each other, but spoiler alert, in the modern type chart, there are no two different types that can super effectively hit each other. Fun fact, this means that in Generation 1, Paris and Parasect had 4 times weaknesses, being 4 times weak to fire, flying, and poison. This is the only time any Pokemon has ever had more than 2 4 times weaknesses, since in the modern type chart, it's not possible to have more than 2 without involving abilities. These are all of the poison type moves introduced in Gen 1, and prior to Gen 4, all of the attacking moves were physical. So special attacking poison types were not very happy Pokemon. Especially Gengar. Gengar's best stat is its special attack, and both Ghost and Poison moves were all physical prior to the split. As you can see from this list, none of the moves are particularly impressive, the strongest being Sludge at only 65 base power. I suspect that Poison wasn't made super offensively strong because its primary strategy was supposed to be poisoning the enemy, or maybe even bad poisoning using Toxic. So that could be the reason. It also could just be because Gen 1 is terrible and they sucked at balancing things back then. It was their first try. We'll cut them some slack, but ugh. The Gen 1 poison type specialist was the already mentioned Koga, but Agatha is basically a poison specialist as well. She's technically a ghost specialist, but since her 3 ghosts are poison types, and then her next 2 are also poison types, she's got a whole squad of poison type Pokemon. One final note about the poison type in Gen 1 is that they cannot be poisoned. Would be weird if they could be. Well, they could be by Twin Needle, because it's a bug type move, but all the other ways don't work. But then came Generation 2. The generation where Game Freak basically went, so you know this really abundant type that we created, that we clearly really liked because we made so many of them? What if we made it garbage? Ah, so like a poison type Pokemon that's based on trash or maybe a trash bag. No, I mean like make it bad in battle. But you might be onto something. I'm gonna think about that for about 10 years. This became the new type chart for the poison type in Gen 2. The first thing they changed was its relationship with the bug type. Instead of both being super effective against each other, Poison now resists Bug, and that's the only relation between them. This means that Poison is now only super effective against Grass. Poison definitely got a better deal than Bug in regards to that specific change, but overall, the Poison type got screwed in Gen 2. Its advantage over Bug was replaced with doing nothing to the new Steel type. Now, it wasn't weak to Steel, but the fact that it went from being strong against 2 types to now only being strong against 1 and having a type it can't do anything against is brutal. I believe that under the Gen 2 type chart, which remained in place all the way until Generation 6, Poison was either the second worst or flat out worst offensive type. It was only strong against 1 other type, Grass, a type that has a lot of other weaknesses, and then it was resisted by 4 types and couldn't touch a 5th. To compare it to some others, Dragon also was only strong against 1 type itself, but only 1 type resisted it, Steel. Normal isn't strong against anything, but it had 2 resistances instead of 4, while also not able to touch 1 other type. So I'm not really sure whether Poison or Normal was the worst offensive type, but I can say with confidence that the 2 of them were at the bottom of the barrel. Only 1 poison type move was added in Gen 2, Sludge Bomb. which was actually a nice addition since it gave the type an attack with actually respectable power. Unfortunately, only Grimer and Muck learned it by level up, with all the others that could learn it needing a single use TM. So in a legit playthrough, you can't really spread it around. After the absurd amount of poison types they added in Gen 1, they really scaled it back for Gen 2 and only added 4. Spinarak, Ariados, Crobat, and Quillfish. Crobat is great, very strong Pokemon, but the others are not all that impressive. Gen 2 had 1 new poison specialist, but 2 total. The new one was Janine, Koga's daughter who takes over the Fuchsia City Gym because Koga moved up to the Elite Four. Also, there's Morty, who's the Ghost Gym leader, but has an entire team of poison types since he, for some reason, does not use a Mischievous. They don't know any poison type moves though, so he definitely leaned into the ghost thing. Then came Generation 3, which did little to assist the downtrodden poison type. There was no changes to the type chart, and the new poison type Pokemon added were not all that impressive. The new fully evolved poison type Pokemon were Dustox, Roselia, Swalot, and Seviper. The overall weakest generation of poison type Pokemon so far based on average base stat total. I love Seviper, I think it's really cool, but it is not very good. There's a lot of Pokemon like that in Gen 3. Just really upsetting for a Hoenn baby like me who cares about the stats. Come on, guys, why weren't they stronger? Only 2 new moves were added, Poison Fang and Poison Tail, neither of which are very good or strong. Poison Fang has the interesting quirk of having a chance to badly poison the target instead of just regular poisoning, but it's too weak to make much of a difference. Also, starting in Gen 3 and going until Gen 7 when Corrosion is added, Poison-type Pokemon cannot be poisoned at all. In Gens 1 and 2, Twin Needle could poison a Poison-type Pokemon, but not anymore starting in Gen 3. So Gen 3 didn't do much of anything to help the Poison type, but Gen 4 did help it a bit. The biggest impact was the physical special split. Prior to Diamond and Pearl, all poison type attacks were physical moves. But then starting in Gen 4, special attacking poison types like Gengar and Vileplume could actually make proper use of their offensive poison type capabilities. Mainly just using Sludge Bomb, but still. And the physical attacking poison types weren't screwed over either, because they added actually a lot of physical poison type moves for them to make use of. Cross Poison, Poison Jab, and Gunk Shot were 3 new physical poison type moves that are all very solid, with Cross Poison having decent power but a nice high crit rate, Poison Jab being solid power with a chance to poison, and Gunk Shot being very powerful in exchange for accuracy. Additionally, there were 2 new status moves, Gastro Acid to suppress the target's ability, and the new entry hazard, Toxic Spikes. Gastro Acid isn't used much, but Toxic Spikes has and continues to make a big impact in battles, both in the competitive scene and just in playthroughs. 1 layer poisons grounded Pokemon entering battle, and a 2nd layer badly poisons them. An extra mechanic for Toxic Spikes that Poison-type Pokemon appreciate is that not only can they not be poisoned by them, but they also absorb them and remove them if they land on them. Additionally, the new Poison-type Pokemon added are actually pretty solid. The fully evolved ones were Roserade, Skuntank, Drapion, and Toxicroak. None of them were broken game changers, but all of them are at least solidly decent Pokemon, with Skuntank and Drapion having the fun aspect of only having 1 weakness. So Gen 4 benefited the poison type, but overall it still wasn't that great. Remember, it's still only super effective against the grass type, and then resisted by 4 and does nothing to the steel type. It still needed quite a bit more help, but then in Gen 5, it still didn't really get it. The new fully evolved poison types were Scolipede, Garbodor, and Amoonguss. Not weak Pokemon, but not game-changing. Amoonguss would go on to have the biggest impact in the competitive doubles scene, largely thanks to Rage Powder. The new moves were alright though. Acid Spray and Clear Smog aren't that exciting, but Coil is a pretty good boosting move that Serpentine Pokemon like Milotic and Serperior like to take advantage of. Sludge Wave became a nice, stronger alternative to Sludge Bomb, and Venoshock can be devastatingly powerful when used on a poisoned target. and I personally have used it as an in-between move on special attacking team members before they can get Sludge Bomb or Sludge Wave. But still, these poison type moves were only super effective against grass types, so they had limited viability. Black 2 and White 2 also added Roxy, the first poison type specialist added since Janine in Gen 2, which is kind of wild to think about. That took a while. So for the first 5 generations of Pokemon, the poison type was just not that great. Its offensive coverage was so narrow that most poison type Pokemon that found success didn't even carry poison type moves. It started as the most abundant type, but then petered off into honestly obscurity. But then Generation 6 happened, and Game Freak finally threw the poison type a bone. Several bones, actually. The bones of fairies. Sorry, that was a little dark. This became the new type chart for poison type Pokemon. For the first time since Generation 1, poison was strong against more than one type, gaining an advantage over the new fairy type, plus a resistance to it as well. This was a massive deal. I talked about in other videos about how the fairy type was created to nerf the overpowered dragon type. But in doing so, the fairy type became the new best type. So yeah, the poison type is still only super effective against 2 types, but one of those types is the best freaking type in the game. The fairy type being added dramatically improved the poison type's importance, value, and viability. The only new species of poison type Pokemon added in Gen 6 were Skrelp and Dragalge. And while I think Dragalge is cool, I don't believe it's had a big impact. There were 3 new poison type Mega Evolutions though. Mega Venusaur, Mega Beedrill, and Mega Gengar. Mega Venusaur was very good. Mega Beedrill was not quite as good as Venusaur, but still quite powerful. And Mega Gengar was insanely overpowered thanks to its incredible stats and Shadow Tag trapping ability, being banned to Ubers. The new moves weren't any good though. Belch is a literally single-use move due to needing to eat a berry to function, and Venom Drench only works on a poisoned foe. But overall, Gen 6 was very kind to poison-type Pokemon. They finally had a role as fairy stoppers, and while not as good as steel types, they still became a much more effective and useful type than they ever were before. Next came Gen 7, and while it didn't add anything to the mechanics of the poison type, so not really any game-changing new moves or type chart matchups, it did add quite a bit to the poison type's roster. First, the moves. Acid Downpour was the Z move, Baneful Bunker is Toxapex's signature move, Purify is Pyukumuku's signature move, and Toxic Thread is Spinarak and Ariados's signature move. The only widespread move here was the Z move. That's not even in the games anymore. But the roster was a lot more impressive. The new fully evolved poison types were Alolan Muck, Salazzle, Toxapex, Nihilego, and Naganadel. Alolan Muck is a very solid Pokemon with only one weakness. Salazzle is a frail but strong Pokemon, capable of poisoning steel and poison types using its corrosion ability. Toxapex is an unkillable wall seen on a myriad of competitive teams. And Nihilego and Naganadel are powerful beast-boosting Ultra Beasts. Whether or not Ultra Beasts should count as legendary Pokemon is an ongoing debate. I personally don't think they should since there's multiple of each of them, but assuming you do count them as legendary Pokemon, then Nihilego is the first Poison-type legendary Pokemon in the entire main series, since it was in Sun and Moon while Poipole and Naganadel were a year later in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So assuming you count Ultra Beasts as legends, and you also count mythical Pokemon as legends, which I think that you should, then the Poison type is the last type to get a legendary Pokemon in the main series. If you do not count mythical Pokemon as legendaries, then it's still the last, it's just tied with Bug, since Genesect no longer counts, and Nihilego was introduced alongside Buzzwole and Pheromosa. And before any of you comment this, Arceus/Arcus/whatever holding a Toxic Plate does not count as a Poison-type legendary Pokemon. That would be silly. I'm talking what their type is when they ain't holding anything. The Gen 7 Poison Specialist was Plumeria, the Team Skull admin. So she's not a gym leader or kahuna or trial captain, but she becomes a champion contender, so like, pretty impressive. And then finally, we get to Generation 8, which I don't think has dramatically impacted the poison type, but it's added some fun stuff. These are the new poison type moves in Gen 8. Max Ooze is the max move, which is actually weaker than most other max moves because, like Max Knuckle, it boosts the user's and its allies' special attack. G-Max Malodor is Gigantamax Garbodor's move. Corrosive Gas is an Isle of Armor tutor move that deactivates the held items of all Pokemon on the field except the user. And Shell Sidearm is Galarian Slowbro's very good signature move that can use either its physical or special attack. The new poison Pokemon are Galarian Weezing, Galarian Slowbro, Galarian Slowking, Toxel, Toxtricity, and Eternatus. To be perfectly honest, I don't really know how good these Pokemon are in the competitive scene, but at the very least, they have good stats. Speaking of good stats, if you do not count Ultra Beasts as legendaries, then Eternatus is the first poison-type legendary Pokemon. And whether it makes it the last type to get a legendary Pokemon depends on whether you count mythicals or not. Is Genesect a legendary? I think so, but if you don't think so, then we're still waiting on a bug one, if you don't count mythicals and Ultra Beasts. But look, it's Eternatus. On the topic of Eternatus, amusingly, the poison type, which has been kind of absent since Gen 1, can now boost that it has the strongest Pokemon of all time. Kind of. Eternamax Eternatus has the absolutely bonkers base stat total of 1,125, which is clearly broken beyond belief. But this doesn't really count. These stats are only used for the 4-on-1 battle in the climax of Sword and Shield story. Without hacking the game, no player can actually use Eternamax Eternatus with those stats in battle. So like, it's not really the strongest Pokemon, but it kinda is. Also, the poison specialist is Clara from the Isle of Armor, who was revealed in the Galarian Star Tournament to have become a minor league poison type gym leader. And thus concludes the journey of the poison type so far. It started extremely abundant, and then became terrible, and then got a bit better, but is still definitely not one of the best types out there. It's one of the strangest journeys any type has been on. Thanks so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link is in the description below. Also, if you want to check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend these videos here. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, big fans, gotta catch them all.